He never pastored a church. He never published a book. He died at 29, in a borrowed bed, in a borrowed room. And yet the life of David Brainerd set the course of modern missions. The Brainerd name already meant something in Connecticut. Daniel Brainerd had come over from England as a boy of 8, built a life in Haddam, and served his community as a justice of the peace and a deacon of the church. His son Hezekiah followed him in public life and in faith. Hezekiah's son David Brainerd was born on April 20th, 1718, Easter Sunday. He was one of 9 children, but young David's life was not one of ease. By the time he was 14, he had been fatherless for 5 years and had lately added to that wound the death of his mother. Grief came early and stayed long. He was, by his own admission, somewhat sober and inclined rather to melancholy. From childhood, he had been surrounded by Puritan faith, relatives and grandparents involved in ministry, and yet the good news of Christ remained beyond his grasp. For years he wrestled with it. He prayed, he fasted, he recounted sermons to himself and avoided the company of young people, to associate with the elderly, thinking he might somehow earn favor with God. And still, no peace came. Then, on the evening of July 12, 1739, everything changed. Walking alone in a dark, thick grove of trees, Brainerd recorded what happened.
I was brought to see myself lost and helpless. Then, as I was walking in a dark, thick grove, unspeakable glory seemed to open to the view and apprehension of my soul. It was a new inward apprehension or view that I had of God, such as I never had before. I stood still, wondered, and admired.
2 months later, in September 1739, Brainerd enrolled at Yale College to prepare for ministry. The Great Awakening was sweeping New England. George Whitefield had even preached at the college. In early 1742, caught up in the fever of revival, Brainerd made a reckless mistake. He was overheard saying that tutor Chauncey Whittlesey, a vocal critic of the Great Awakening, had no more grace than a chair. Word reached Rector Clapp. Clapp demanded a public confession. Brainerd refused to publicly confess a sin committed in private, and Yale expelled him, closing every door to conventional ministry. Around that same time, Brainerd had begun spitting up blood, the first sign of tuberculosis, then called consumption, a disease that would shadow every remaining year of his life. He was also overwhelmed by another consuming desire, to bring the gospel to the native peoples of the American frontier. He wrote,
"Here I am, Lord, send me. Send me to the ends of the earth. Send me to the rough, the savage pagans of the wilderness. Send me from all that is called comfort on earth."
God heard and answered that prayer. Commissioned by the Society in Scotland for the propagation of Christian knowledge in 1742, Brainerd set out the following spring. What followed was 4 years of relentless labor across New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. He covered more than 3,000 miles, often alone, on horseback. He struggled through tangled Indian dialects, endured physical exhaustion, and pressed the early ravages of tuberculosis deeper into silence while he kept riding. He preached to people who had every reason not to trust a white man. The results were discouraging. Still, he refused to quit. He wrote in his journal,
"To an eye of reason, everything respecting the conversion of the heathen is as dark as midnight. Yet I cannot but hope in God for the accomplishment of something glorious among them."
Then, in the summer of 1745, Brainerd moved to Crossweek-Sung, New Jersey, to preach among the Delaware Indians. What happened next was beyond anything he had planned or produced. A sudden outpouring of God's Spirit swept through the community. A congregation of more than 100 new believers took root where there had been none. Brainerd had not manufactured a revival. He had simply remained faithful until God moved. By 1746, his body was failing fast. Tuberculosis was winning. He relocated his congregation to Cranberry, New Jersey, hoping they would be established there as a lasting Christian community. One final missionary journey, in August 1746, ended in collapse. He returned to Cranberry, unsure he would recover, but he kept preaching, even sometimes from his bed. On March 18, 1747, he gathered his Indian congregation one last time. By then, there were 85 communicant members. He led them in scripture, a psalm, and prayer. Then he said his goodbyes. Brainerd made his way back to New England, but was not healthy enough to complete the journey, instead stopping at Jonathan Edwards's home in Northampton, Massachusetts. Before that day, the two men were relative strangers. Edwards carefully documented those final months. He wrote that even Brainerd's prayers of thanksgiving over meals were awe-inspiring. On one occasion, when someone brought a Bible into the room, Brainerd looked at it from his bed and said,
"Oh, that dear book, that lovely book. I shall soon see it opened. The mysteries that are in it and the mysteries of God's providence will all be unfolded."
David Brainerd died on October 9, 1747. He was 29 years old. Before he died, Brainerd had placed his diary in Jonathan Edwards's hands to dispose of, as would be most for God's glory and the interest of religion. Edwards edited and published it in 1749. It became the most reprinted book Edwards ever wrote, and the best-selling religious book in 19th century America. William Carey read it like a second Bible before sailing to India. Robert Murray McCheyne read it in 1832 and wrote that it left him more set upon missionary enterprise than ever. John Wesley abridged it and told every preacher he knew to read it. Jim Elliot and David Livingstone both held Brainerd with a kind of awe and were marked by his example. It has been said that the modern missionary movement might never have taken the shape it did without Brainerd's example. He had written,
"I have received my all from God. Oh, that I could return my all to God."
And he did just that. The diary of a man who never graduated, never pastored, and never saw his 30th birthday became one of the most influential books in the history of Christian missions. He had prayed for sanctification and the ingathering of souls. God answered both, through a life and through the story of that life, repeated in the hearts of missionaries ever since.